Hola, everyone, or hello. Welcome back to the Ælfric Homily project. We are going to go over some of the stuff from the Michaelmas homily, which is the September reading and translation I decided to go with for this year. And we are well through the year at this point. I mean, we have a couple more to go, a few more to go, I guess specifically, but. Um, But today I wanted to talk about, we're going to end up talking about a couple more homilies, I think, that you might want to supplement your reading of Ælfric's homily. And so let's get right into that. So this is, of course, a Series 1 homily. Again, the reading, you can go listen to that if you would like. And this is from Liuza, who's his pictured right there. I have it over here, but the homily tells of the dedication of the church to Saint Michael on Mount Gargano in southeastern Italy. The dedication was elsewhere celebrated on May 8th, but September 29th is the date given in other homilies known in early medieval England. Gargano is one of a number of mountain shrines associated with Archangel Michael, such as Mont Saint Michel in France and St. Michael's Mount in Cornwall. And Gargano is in fact in Puglia, or Apula, near the Adriatic coast, some distance from Campania. So again, this is just some commentary on his on Ælfric's comments itself. Not, I don't really have a lot to pull from Liuza this time, but this is actually that shrine though on Gargano in Italy. This picture is from Holger W. Schmidt. And quite lovely. You can actually kind of see that it's in higher elevation. And then also the most famous, I'd say, probably is Mont Saint Michel up here on the left, which is of course flooded often, and you need to, there's a causeway that is flooded. But actually, it's the same thing with St. Michael's Mount in Cornwall, though not as large. This picture is actually rather old as well. I believe this picture is over 100 years old, I think. Also has a flooded causeway. So some pretty buildings dedicated to Michael the Archangel. I will say actually that note here one thing on pronunciation, and then this is one thing I'm constantly trying to mess with my pronunciation, and I've read pretty much, not everything obviously. Part of my problem is that I've been studying Old English for largely more on like the 5 years. Pretty much I started right around the time my second daughter was born, and so almost 6 years. And for almost that entire time, it was on my own. And while I'm very busy, I have a lot of interests. I do a lot of things, and I stay very busy. Mostly I do a lot of things because I don't always feel like doing Old English stuff, and so when I'm not feeling like doing that, I probably feel like doing something else I'm interested in. But and so a lot of it I need to relearn in some ways since I'm not doing it constantly. I'm much more focused. Over the last couple of years, I've done a lot more Old English than I ever did in those first 4 years, essentially. But I do forget things. So, for example, I have a tendency to pronounce my long ashes as I rather than just ah. I think it kind of makes sense in some ways. A lot of those seem to become I in modern English, but also the one thing I often stumble over is my G's. I try to get a lot of your G's in Old English are yes, of course. A lot of them are really there's not a lot of g's unless they're initially and they're more of the gamma, the right. And I tend to get that right. The thing is where it trips me up and where I just don't even notice half the time is when it's by an N, and I don't even realize it should be a J, because it was been stuck in my mind for a long time that CG makes a J sound, and it does normally, right? In Old English, and but not NG. And so like the word singe, for example, is sinjan, and it's NG. And so the thing I always say Enyel, and it's actually Angel. It sounds a lot more like an angel. So I've been catching myself on stuff like that, and I'm going to try to. But that was the point. That's the disclaimer in all of my homily readings. My Old English is much better than someone who has had no training. But even people that have a lot of training, I think, stumble over it a lot. I don't think knowing 100% is really ever going to happen in a lot of ways. But I do think it's important to try to be accurate and to be able to explain why you think what you think in a lot of ways. For example, there's people who say Ælfric, for example, instead of Ælfric, right? And I think they both can make sense, actually. So, anyways, that is just a note, an aside. So essentially, I just wanted to mention real quick, Michaelmas, well, not as big of a holiday today. It is the Feast of St. Michael. Sometimes the Feast of St. Michael and all archangels. Sometimes the Feast of St. Michael and all angels, just completely. The name Michael himself, it has a really long etymology to get to English, but essentially it comes from Hebrew, of course, and it means one who is like God, which is quite the cool name, I would say. And one thing I did want to share briefly, actually, as this is a common image associated with Michaelmas, it doesn't really come up in the homily at all, but is the verses from Revelation chapter 12 in the New Testament, starting in verse 7, and not getting through all of verse 12, but ending at the first part of verse 12. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. The dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, Now is come salvation and strength, and the kingdom of our God, and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb, and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto the death. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. So the accuser, Satan, is cast down, and Michael is given, I mean, he's just really mentioned at the start here, is given that credit. And so we're going to look at some art here, example, but you can also get a much longer, kind of epic storytelling version of this in chapter 6 or book 6 of Paradise Lost by Milton, of course. So just a heads up there if you want to read. It's harder to break up and to actually share here, so just a heads up though. Here's some. This is actually the one on the left is the one for the thumbnail, and that's Guido Reni's, and then also Gustave Doré over here on the right. So let you look at those for a second. Doré is just always has his wonderful style. I did study art, but I'm not too strict into art story and stuff. But then Raphael is probably the most famous of his vanquishing here of Satan. But it's also a medieval motif pops up here on the right. This actually, the one on the right is the thumbnail from the reading itself. Just a miniature. And then another one as well, another medieval one. So this one, just like that last medieval one, is strictly a dragon and not just a guy looking Satan. Strictly a dragon. So, yeah, we have those. So, as the Anglo-Saxon holiday, I don't really have much actually to add here. It is pretty much that transition from harvest. This is the season of harvest, right, into later autumn. The equinox would have been, I think, 5 days before this, and it's actually mentioned in the Menologium, which I did not take the excerpt from this time like I normally do. If you want to, I'll try to link Eleanor Parker's one of her blog posts on Michaelmas, and she talks about it. She talks, or at least it's mentioned in the Menologium, the word emnictus, which is the word for equinox, one of the words kind of for equinox in Old English, and it's really just a calque of that Latin equinox, right? Even night. Emnictus is not quite the standard. It'd be evenictus, which is literally even, like an even number or whatever. So again, I'll try to mention that there. But one thing I think that is interesting for the day is either on Michaelmas or Michaelmas Eve in 1066, William the Bastard landed in Pevensey, Sussex, just days after Harold Godwin's victory at Stamford Bridge, which was on the 25th of September. And of course, this would lead up to the Battle of Hastings, just a couple weeks away in the middle of October, where essentially Anglo-Saxon England would see its end. So I also believe there was a great flood, actually, too. I should have mentioned that. I think there was a great flood. Is it year 1014? That's mentioned in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. I can look this up real quick, so I will look it up for you. But if my computer is fast, my computer has been having problems, so it's not very fast. Yes, okay, yep, 1014. Also, Michaelmas Eve. There's a big flood. So you can look more into that if you would like to, since I forgot to mention it here. Hi. So first off, I wanted to actually look at a different homily, the Blickling Homilies. We actually kind of sort of looked at one for the Assumption last month, one of the Blickling Homilies. These are other homilies written in Old English, a little older than Ælfric's stuff. And I have the link here, but I actually also have it open already. So let me switch my share screen. See, yeah, I have to stop because the system is not set up the best way. So you have to look at my mug for a second. And then, which one is it? I have way too many things open. I think this is it, yes. Okay, make sure you can see that. Yes, okay. We are back. This is the Blickling Homilies. I just wanted to briefly touch on the beginning here, and then we'll go to the part that I mostly want to look at, which is actually at the end. So we have, men. Oh yeah, sorry. Let's see, men tha Leofestan. Very typical opening as we've seen. Manas us under Turonian at Nika Seo Minjath. Seo Ar and Seo Adines. Yeah, Adines. Das Han and Das Hargan Ha Ingeles Tid. That way Hwat Hugu Bethara his Argan Iminda. Se the is on Aldra im Wirfta to Werthiana and to Worldriana his Chirchan. Chirichan, yeah, Chirichan, okay. I don't know if any of that. There's a lack of space, I would say, there, and then yeah, I don't know. Kind of standard. I mean, a little, not quite the same. As other manuscripts we've looked at, which is one of the reasons I wanted to look at this one. It is not the same. It is just nice to look at different manuscripts. We're actually going to look at another one here in a minute. So, yes. Let's see. That way, okay. That way, what? Bethara. Okay, yeah. That, again, that ligature, that way. Okay, yeah, okay. I think it's rather straightforward. Again, make sure you're watching out for things like this, which means that. There wins rather than P. Betha. So, yeah. And for this, I want to go forward a few pages, if you will, a few leaves. I think it's near the end of this one, so I can't remember exactly how many pages we have to go. Yeah, okay, so if you can see, the one for Martinmas starting over here. So if you go here and actually a little further down the middle, I think it's actually rather easy to see the break right here. So if you go here, and what do we have? Okay, so we have, let me look at this real quick. We have Swa, so we have Swa, St. Paul, or as St. Paul. Let's see, Swa. Being turned around. Oh, I think this Swa, is this Quath, actually? Swa Quath, maybe? No, that's, no, that's up there. I'm trying, I think Paul has mentioned brief, I think within 2 times, like, brief, yeah, right here, okay, Swa Quath right there, okay. Okay, so we're at the second Swa with Paul. Okay. So what this one is Swa Sanctus Paulus, and so we have this abbreviation for Sanctus Paulus, which is it looks like a SCS kind of long SCS, Sanctus Paulus. Let's see. Paulus, yes, was ye sailed northward and descended yard. Was sailed, yeah, okay. Bisna Midan and yard right here, yeah. Okay. Alright. Sorry, I'm really tired. Okay. So we have Paul, and as Paul was looking towards the northern region of the earth, this one, yeah, northern water. Okay, yeah, northern region of this Middle Earth, Midan Yard. Yeah, okay. Zar ala. So Watro. The E's get rather large sometimes. Watero, I believe. Watro neither. Yes, Watro neither. Let's see. Neither. Yeah, sorry. No, I said neither. Ye. Ye Witath. Okay, and yes, and. Okay, yeah. So if we look at translating this a little bit strictly, actually, I want to look at comparison more than anything. But yeah, so as St. Paul was looking towards the northern regions of the earth from whence all waters pass down, he saw, there it is, above. Let's see, okay. The water, above the water. Yeah, hoary stone, okay. North of that, okay. Yeah, so I think this last chunk here, really, again, I'm just going to look at the comparisons more strictly, because I mostly need to be looking at this by myself, because I'm mostly sitting here going, with my mouth hanging open. But I do think it's really fun to look at the manuscripts themselves. And this one's not terribly hard to read, actually. I think once you get you have your thats and your ons. I think the hardest things, honestly, for me are the shortenings of Latin words. So sanctus, right? But I think really easy to spot then if you just, in fact, if you wanted to go to the last part of this, which is, we're going to compare it to Beowulf, actually, which is why I think that's commonly done, actually. If you click over here, the Homily 17, it'll bring you right to the end of Homily 16, which is the Michaelmas one. And like I said, it's pretty easy to see right here once you get to this section about Paul describing hell is really what he's describing. but it is comparable to how Grendel's mirror is described, actually. So I want to look at that real quick. I need to probably share my screen again. Back to the other one. There we go. Share screen. Share to this. Okay. So Beowulf and the Visio Sancti Pauli. So the Visio Pauli was a popular apocryphal Latin work from the 4th century. It's probably influencing the Homilies XVI we just looked at above, as well as some description in Beowulf. So seemingly they both have this common source. Not that the Blickling Homily is the source of Beowulf, or nor that Beowulf is the source for the Blickling Homily. That it is just a common crop for sources. I mean, like, I think actually something that's interesting to point out is the idea of authorship in the medieval times. And this is especially early medieval. And this is kind of an aside, but I do think it is very interesting. So I'll just mention it here, actually, because you can read this in Fulks and Kane's History of Old English Literature, which is actually rather, is really accessible, actually, for someone who doesn't really speak Old English at all. It gives you a good idea of the corpus, essentially. So this is kind of an idea on authorship. I just want to read an excerpt for that. I can't remember exactly where in the book it is, but even after the introduction of book production, native literature remained mostly in oral medium. This is of no small importance to the study of Old English literature, since oral and literate compositions demand substantially different approaches. The fundamental fact of oral literature is that it is performative. While we tend to think of literary works as books, the earliest Germanic literature cannot be said to have had any existence except in performance. In this sense, then, all literature was popular literature, since only performed songs could be learned and transmitted, which is an interesting idea when you have the argument in modern literary studies, which is English in that sense is very distant from English in the sense of language, but that literature is not the same thing as, say, like popular fiction or like genre fiction, right? Essentially, but that does not work. That idea does not work when we're talking about Old English works, essentially. A consequence of performance is that the text of any given work had no fixed form. This observation highlights how oral literature differs from a performative medium like modern drama. Dissimilarities in different performances of the same oral narrative are not to be regarded as deviations from a correct or original text. Each performance is the text. Presumably, different performances of the same narrative material might differ profoundly, as when, for example, Hrothgar's court poet combines unrelated narratives about ancient heroes to form a knot song in praise of Beowulf. And that's 867 to 915 in Beowulf. And thus the roles of poet and performer are not differentiated. The Old English word "shope" applies to both. In the light of these observations, it should be clear that although we tend to speak of modern poetry as having been written, or i.e. composed, and of being read, again, quotation marks, these terms must usually be avoided in regard to Old English poetry, as they impose a modern model of production and reception that distorts our understanding of early medieval conditions. King Ælfric, for example, almost certainly did not write the metrical preface to the Pastoral Care, since it is unlikely that he could write, writing being a menial and laborious activity reserved for scribes. Even the term poems, though not yet stigmatized in Old English literary criticism, is prejudicial, as it seems that all such compositions were sung, or capable of being sung, with the accompaniment of a stringed instrument, a lyre or harp. And poem and song, though perhaps undifferentiated, for Anglo-Saxons, have very different connotations for us. The orality of the medium explains why even late into the 11th century, nearly all verse in Old English is anonymous. Authorship is a concept foreign to a literature in which ancient traditions are continually refashioned and there is no single correct or original text of a work. Even nearly the only instance in which we find in manuscript a direct attribution outside of a vernacular poem to its maker, the expression is not one of authorship, but of performative primacy. Primo cantavit, Cadman istud Cadman. Cadman first sang this song, for which the same reason it would not have occurred did Anglo-Saxons supply titles for their poetic works. Titles imply a textual stability that comes only with literacy, and thus the ones attached to Old English poetic texts are all modern. Two modern concepts dependent on fixed authorship and ideal text are notions of authorial originality and individual style. Modern sensibilities favor what is new and different about literary works, so that a high value is placed on overturning literary traditions and producing works that are strikingly original. The entire purpose of a tradition bound medium like oral poetry, on the other hand, is to keep old stories alive, each performance amounting to an act of recreating the tradition. Sorry. In striving to produce something strikingly new, modern authors aim to develop a distinctive style. Old English poetry, on the other hand, is exceptionally uniform in style. Although a poet's habits and choice of vocabulary or syntax may differentiate one poem from another, the differences are exceptionally subtle. They are almost certainly not the product of a Chop's desire to express his individuality. Oral literature tends to be poetic in form, and indeed, as remarked above, Tacitus says that their ancient songs were the only form of history and tradition among the Germani. In part, this is because heroic literature is by nature archaizing, aiming to memorialize the deeds of ancestors, and archaized language belongs particularly to the realm of poetry. But it is also because stylized language is an aid to the composition of literature preserved in memory alone. Since composition is extempore, traditional vocabulary and phrases allow the Schoep to satisfy the alliterative and metrical requirements of a line by furnishing him ready-made material that at the same time enhances the poetic authority of his narrative by its association with a long poetic tradition. I know it's a lot. I think it's very useful, though. Again, gives you ideas of authorship. It's not really a gotcha. I think mostly, even if Beowulf was pulling, say, from this Blickling homily, it would be more of just an idea, something to help scholars with dating, rather than saying, "Oh wow, look, Beowulf's not as original as we thought it was." I'm not sure anyone's saying that. Just that is something I think, as someone who reads a lot of modern works, that is something I've seen. Like, for example, I've seen someone who, there is one work that does something, and some other person was a big fan of another work that had done something, and was really trying to make it, was hoping that the second thing that had done a really similar thing, or essentially the same thing, had done it before the first thing, right? Because that was so valued, that originality, and it disappointed this person that it had been done after. Like, it really matters in a sense, right? But that, again, that only matters in this idea of authorship. And so, I mean, like, when you have like these medieval works, they're all, I mean, it's like kind of shared, it's like communal property, pretty much, literature, if you will. And it's very different, very different than how we view things today, right? I think we're very lucky to be able to even read that like we do. So, but also it gives us certain ideas that are relatively recent in mindset, at least. I mean, they're kind of romantic, capital R, like 19th century romanticism in a lot of ways. So, dealing with novelty and not so much with tradition and the stories that are worth surviving. And so they do, because they're told, because they're popular, right? Anyways, so the actual comparison, again, this is from Beowulf and the Blickling Homilies and some textual notes by Carlton Brown from 1938, so it's rather old, but you can see the comparisons here. For example, I'll just go over a couple of them, and I'll read the lines in Beowulf, but you have the Blickling Homily on the left, in the order there, and then it's not quite in the same order in Beowulf, but it is two chunks of Beowulf that are close together, as you can see it. So, Thar alla watro nidrojevitath, which we actually looked at, which has Thar fyrien stram nidrojevitith. Over tham watera sunna harnestan. Fyrien, Fyrien barmas over harnestan chlonian funda. North of tham stana, awexena svita chrimia barwas. Over tham hungieth chrinde barwas. So, really similar lines there, but Sistro Yinipu, under Nasa Yinipu, under Thamstana was Nikara Ardung, Nikar Husafela, Tham Klivar Hangodon, over Tham Hungiat Grinde Barwas, Tham Isjan Baru, Wuder Wirtem was water over Helmuth, and that water was zwart under Tham Klivar Neovan, water under Stoth Dreori, und I drivet. Right. So you get the idea. Anyways, I get the nasal in there. I wanted to read. This is from Tom Shippey's, real quick. Tom Shippey's more recent translation of Beowulf. This is not the second edition. There is a newer edition with more material in here. I'm just too broke to be able to get another version of this. This is from Upsala Books, which this is not sponsored by them, but I will say that every book from Upsala Books is worth your time. I've read all of them except for the newest one by Rusum, which I'm sure, and what came out in August, I said, I'm sure this is the best release in August. I haven't read it yet. I don't have the funds to get a copy of it. But every other book that I've read by Upsala, which is every other book that they've published, besides maybe the art book, I guess, as well. I don't think I have that one. But be it Woden, or be it their Bhagavad Gita, or Eric Bright Eyes, or Waltarius, all really good stuff. Everything they know they have forthcoming, I'm really looking forward to as well. Maybe I will get money soon. But anyways, this is a great translation. Maybe not as thick as Kleber's, but still probably good enough to say teach a class on Beowulf. Just right here, this one volume. So anyways, if we'll go to now, if you can look here, the 1359 through like 1364 section. Just want to read that real quick. Let's see. They dwell the giant pair in the hidden country, wolf-haunted slopes, windy nesses, dangerous Finland, where the stream pours down under the dark cliffs from the mountain to sink underground. The mere lies from here not far in miles. Over it there hang frosty-bound groves, fast-rooted woods overshadow the water. That's that section. And then the next section, let's see if I can find a good place to start. Beowulf is written in a way that just keeps on adding to itself. So, the prince's child crossed steep stony cliffs, a narrow path, trails in single file, unknown territory, precipitous promontories, home to many monsters. He and a few others showed the way in front for the wise men following, till suddenly he came upon the mountain trees, leaning over a gray stone, a cheerless wood. Beneath it, the water was bloody and turbid. All right, so you get the idea there. We kind of already looked at the Blickling Homilies, but let me just read this real quick for you. I think this is Morris's translation. But as St. Paul was looking towards the northern region, the earth from whence all waters pass down, he saw above the water a hoary stone, and north of the stone had grown woods very rimy. And there were dark mists, and under the stone was the dwelling place of monsters and execrable creatures. And he saw hanging on the cliffs, on the icy woods, many black souls with their hands bound, and the devils in likeness of monsters were seizing them, like greedy wolves, and the water under the cliff beneath was black. And between the cliff and the water there were about 12 miles. And when the twigs break, then down went the souls, who hung on the twigs, and the monsters seized them. These were the souls of those who in this world wickedly sinned, and would not cease from it before their life's end. But let us now bid St. Michael's earnestly to bring our souls into bliss, where they may rejoice without end in eternity. Amen. So it's the very end of the homily, which is very interesting. You notice the main difference there is actually those trees are described as holding souls in the homily, and they're not in Beowulf. But it definitely has this imagery of hell, this imagery of a cold northern hell, though, not the burning hell. So, very interesting. There is actually a lot of scholarship on this. So, some I'll mention. Actually, I pulled these all from Nidor's commentary on Shippey's Beowulf. But another one I think is actually also mentioned there, but I can just mention because it's more recent publication. That I've read as well, and that is Hrinde Barwas, The Trees at the Mere and the Root of All Evil in Beowulf by Michael Bentley from the Journal of English and Germanic Philology. What is this? Volume 119, number 3, University of Illinois Press, July 2020. Which, if you are interested in this type of stuff, this is maybe like the highest recommended one. Personally, as far as like interesting articles, you get one of these and they're pretty much everything's interesting. I mean, you get something like modern philology, and a lot of it is interesting. There's other articles out there in different. There's lots of different. There's lots of them, right? I mean, there's lots of different journals. But as far as the one that I find, like pretty much 100% almost satisfied, guaranteed, is that one. Again, I'm not subscribed to it right now, but I would be if I could be. So The next thing I want to look at actually is kind of something and I'm sorry, I just like kind of like fish-eyed on the last homily we looked at, but I'm gonna kind of do the same thing for this one. I can almost guarantee it. But I wanted to show you a Norwegian homily also on Michaelmas. One of Ælfric's homilies, I think on false gods, is actually translated into Old Norse, which is very interesting. So when I go over that, I'll probably go over the Old Norse equivalent of this as well. But this is actually one of the oldest texts that survives. It's found by about the year 200 in Old Norse. And this homily, I believe, also has the equivalent in an Old Icelandic homily book, considered the same homily I've seen from some sources. I couldn't find much information on it, and I could not find the Old Icelandic version of it. I did find a rather old copy of the Old Icelandic homily, but I think it was actually translated into modern Icelandic, and so not so much worth showing. Icelandic is considered rather conservative, and when you learn Old Norse, there's a good chance you're actually going to learn modern Icelandic pronunciation, but it's not the same. So, for example, Viking Age pronunciation is not the same as, say, 12th century, 13th century pronunciation, and it's not the same as modern Icelandic. So that's the thing with like philology and doing dead languages in general, is the time you're actually trying to be accurate to. And I think it makes it more difficult trying to be accurate to everything, but I think having the idea that maybe if you are learning one thing, that's what it is. Like that this one thing is strictly like when you learn French, what are you learning? You're learning like really standard Parisian French, right? Or like I think the most recent grammar on Gothic, I can't remember who wrote it off the top of my head, is rather syncretic. It's not diachronic really at all. And personally, I think when you're doing a dead language, I think diachronic is more preferable to me. It's a bit more old-fashioned, I guess, but let us switch again to a different this one, yes, okay, to a different manuscript to look at. And so this one, again, I'll link all this down below. So the reason I said I'm going to butcher this is because I'm having a really hard time. My Old Norse is not nearly as well. I haven't had nearly as much time to put into it as my Old English. Old English is my primary interest, but I am interested in this actually, and that is, well, let's see if we can zoom in actually first, because I wanted to look at the first sentence, and I couldn't actually get a completely solid translation on it. So if anyone has any ideas, then feel free to share them. Maybe I should zoom in a little more, actually. Right here. So you have the rather large capital. Actually, maybe I should mention the title is down here, actually. It's on the last. It's on the previous page. Very, very bottom. It's funny because you definitely would not do a book like this nowadays. You did have ruling on these, and you actually can still see it. You can see the ruling. And often in these manuscripts, it doesn't last very long. It's a very complicated ruling, one of these books I studied in a codicology class. You can still see some of it, though. And so, of course, they had an extra line down here, even though they had finished their last homily. And they weren't going to skip this line. What this is Latin, of course. It's admonitio valda necessaria, is long S here, yeah. Sanctorum, but a bunch of stuff is cut out here. Sanctorum, your AN is cut out. It's SC OR, I think. Yeah, that's OR. I don't know. It's a little hard to read. Angelorum. In the Sancti, so again, just S. Michael, and then probably is. Michaelis, just for class purposes here, but that's the title. So then you go back, way back over here in the next volume. There's your capital. And so what we have is we have whole teeth. And your O is capital as well, which is interesting. We know it's just one word. Whole teeth. My main struggles with this translation is the fact that I couldn't figure out what Hoteeth is. It might be like a coal. like a hail, or it's not obviously hata, which is hate. So anyways, you have the long S again. Hotith su erver. It's an AO, but I think the AO would normally be aldum, at least for the time period. It would depend on your dialect as well. But haldum, all, like in bot, haldum, which would often be in a modern edited text. And I did not find an edited version of this, which is why I also had a tough time with this, because I'll get there's more in this sentence. It would be an O with the hook on it. So haldum. This does show us that it's probably first person plural, though, the verb here, to hold. Not dative plural. You do have that in Old Norse, actually, dative plural. You'll see it right here, actually. But you also see it in verbs in Old Norse. So, Hold'em I dag sat till Diothar, which I couldn't really figure out this one either. Allum, again, I think this would be hooked, but it is not. It's allur in the nominative, at least. Guths Inglum. What's really cool here is, so this is pretty much something like that which we hold today is a how do I translate this? Today is a tribute to all God's angels. Guths. So you don't have the es as you get it often in Old English. You just have an s for the genitive here, goose, and then Englum, again, you just have the superscript deletion of the m, but you would still say it Englum. You still want to write it out for whatever reason. It's exactly the same, actually, with that dative plural in Old English, which is helpful, I find. And then you have, let's see, thom. I think it'd just probably be thom, normally with not this I in there. And then erguth skapa, which is shape, pretty much. It's the same word, or shape, shipping and stuff like that. Ser to, your prepositions are going to have really different. It's kind of, I would say, as someone learning Old Norse, it's a little difficult figuring out what the objects of all these prepositions are going to be. Are they going to be accusative? Are they going to be dative? Are they going to be genitive? Like, what are they going to be? Also, you have something here that is a little confusing, because all of it, like, also see right here, actually, the skapatha, right? Normally, when you're reading an edited text, this is going to be with a K. It's not going to be a C, but it'd be a sk. It doesn't have that palatalization. It's not sh, like it almost always is in English. Also, this I is really what we normally in edited text would have as a J, and so you have, let's see, Theonastu. Yeah, Theonastu. It looks kind of like an F, but it's a long S and a T crammed right next to each other. Theonastu, which is, again, like a tribute agreement, kind of. Iup. Hava. This is where my main problem with the sentence actually comes from, is this right here. I don't exactly know what's going on. So the angels of God, whom in God, right here, has shaped for a service, essentially, in the high heavens, I would say, but I'm not really sure, actually. I don't know what's going on here. It kind of looks like an A and an A, but I was looking at it earlier and it looked different to me, and I'm trying to remember. Let's see. This kind of looks like an E. Doesn't look like the E from the last manuscript, but it looks like this E. But at the same time, I can't really tell what's going on. Maybe it's an ash I, like right here, but a little closer together. So like Heims. So, but then even if you figure that out, it looks like a genitive or something. But what is this? I don't know what this is. It kind of looks like a Turonian et, but some of these things, like for example, when you go in a Bodleian library and you look at their manuscripts, there's a good chunk of notes actually, and they don't often point you to a specific like folia, but they'll give you good helpful tips for good chunks of the manuscript. And it kind of looks like a Turonian et, but I've never seen a Turonian et look this wonky, right? But could be. The word for et is normally in Old Norse is actually ok. which is related to the Old English word ak, which is also, it can mean also actually in Old Norse, but it's normally just and. I think and is n, I believe, the cognate. Anyway, so, and then hanum, thionado, sitan. Sitan, very nicely, is the exact same as it is again in Old English. So, sitan, that's the first sentence. So essentially, it'd be something like, "That's what you hold today is a tribute to all the angels of God, whom God has shaped for service in the high heavens, since they have been shaped, essentially, or something like that. So, since they have been serviced, put into that service. So, someone feel free to give me a much better translation. I think, again, that's one of the difficulties, especially when you're reading these medieval texts, actually, is that, actually, it's one thing I do think, honestly, that Old Norse seems a little more, how the editing is differentiated. Because honestly, when I find like an old English edited text from 100 years ago, it proves to be largely useful. When you find an Old Norse edited text from 100 years ago, the way they do things doesn't seem as useful as they do them now, or at least it's not even going to agree so much with the stuff they do now. And a lot of it has to do with how they write down vowels in Old Norse, and then how they edit those in modern texts as well. So it's a lot more confusing to me. And so not having the text itself, the modern one, confuses me. I'm not sure if there is one. There is not a lot of those helpful stuff like on the Bodleians things. I think the website's in Norwegian, but there's really not much information on it anyways. So again, it's an interesting thing to look at, though, I think. And I think you can see the similarities to Old English, but also quite the differences. And there's not a lot here. I don't think there's any that starts with V besides there, which I believe would agree with maybe not quite standard what you would see in like an Icelandic text with the here, the first person plural there. So I think this is showing rhoticism, so it'd be like was, it's it's different, but also if you're going circa like more high Middle Ages, your V's have become V's at this point rather than W's. In the Viking Age, are more W's, so like Viking would be Vikingur, right? Fat would be Hwat, right? But in reality, actually, it seems like after certain consonants, that W sound did stick around. So Hwat actually would likely still be Hwat for a while there, and something like Svol would actually still be Swol for a while. But again, it depends on the time, depends on the place. So, like in some places like Sweden, it's much longer actually. And some of those dialects, like Elfdalian, which some people would even say is not actually descended from Old Norse at all, but is like a parallel branch of North Germanic, is very conservative though, as far as sounds are concerned. So, anyways, I just thought that'd be fun to look at, even though I said I was going to butcher this in the first place, and I did. So I apologize if that annoys anyone, but I do think it was interesting to look at. And I keep on going back and forth. I think that's the last time I'm switching though, so we're getting near the end. Let me just go back to this. Okay, there we go. So this is a John Lydgate. He wrote a lot. Actually, I was going to look at something of his on my other channel, but here soon, hopefully. And this is a short prayer of his. Again, you can see at the bottom where it's found. But just wanted to look at it real quick. This is Middle English, rather late, relatively easy to read, understand. O Michael, be grace of Christi su, called among Angelis the heavenly champion, be a prerogative, singular of virtue, held a battle, vanquished the dragoon, be thou our shield and our protection in every mischief of dangerous infernal. Defend our party, present our orison, up to the Lord that governeth all. So you can see some common things here, like your U and V are really the same thing. The V is common at the beginning of a word, U elsewhere, right? So up. This actually is a V though, the virtue, right? Let's see, vanquished. Yeah, I don't know if there's something that we write as a V these days. Yeah, right here, governeth. Okay, governeth, right? Anyway, so again, this is really straightforward. Oh, Michael, by the grace of Christ Jesus, called among angels the heavenly champion, by be a prerogative, singular of virtue, held a battle, vanquished the dragon. Be thou our shield and our protection in every mischief or of dangerous, infernal dangers. Pretty much defend our party, present our orison, which is like prayer. So intercede for us, up to the Lord that governeth all. So yeah, again, rather straightforward, but I think it's nice to look at the Middle English as well. I think you definitely get a sense for English, I think, when you look at the Old English and the Middle English and Modern English. So one thing that we, of course, always do is the words of notes. Again, I'll try to make these rather fast, but if you're looking at the homily itself for translating it, I think some of these might help to have just a quick little explanation for some of them. So orf means cattle or livestock. And far is a bull or a steer. I think it is. I mean, it's synonymous with bull or steer, which do have like stale, for example, is a word for steer. And those survive in modern English, but far it's not. So you have Schlaf, which is a cave, a cabin, or a den. You have Atrian, which is the poison. It's related to the word adderkop, actually, or cobweb, because the adder in adderkop is related to Atrian, which means poison. Poison head, pretty much. Cop means head. And so cobweb is that head web, but literally for adderkop web, right? So adderkop. Right from Tolkien's The Hobbit. So think of that. And then flan, which means arrow, modern flown, which I've again never seen, but handy to know. Typical West Saxon word actually for arrow. The Mercian normally use strel or stral, as it is West Saxonized. Old English arch is where actually the word arrow comes from. Actually rather rare in Old English text though. We also have mund, protection or security, or hand. I guess more literally in a sense, but it's related. That is related to Latin manus, Spanish mano, of course. And see names like Siegmund, which is Sigmundur, in Old Norse. So victory hand, victory protection. Anyway, so and you have Yenip, which is mist, vapor, cloud, storm cloud, darkness. You have Sura, which I believe is Suera in the homily, but Sura is more common when you're looking online. And so it's neck, or related to modern English, swire. And then you have more. Let's go. So we have Samkuka, which is half quick. I think I've seen it translated a few times as like half dead, but it literally means half alive more in my mind, right? I would say half dead. I think if that was made more sense to translation. I mean, it means essentially the same thing, right? Is the cup half full or half empty? I don't know. So, but literally, Sam is half, right? It's actually related to the word semi, which we get from Latin. I guess semicircle is a half circle, right? But it is also where the word like Samwise means half wise, essentially calling someone a half-wit. Actually, it's not good to be Samwise. So, anyways, you also have build, which is where it's how you see it in the homily, I think, but it's Bieldon, which is where the modern word build comes from, which is to make bold. Should use that word more often, huh? We have also Husel, which is modern housel, which means the Eucharist more strictly, but more broadly is just any offering or sacrifice. And then you have the Stapmadum, which is step meal in modern English, or step by step, I guess, is a better way of translating it, because in a lot of ways, because step meal. You also have Stichmadum as well, which is piece by piece. Also, there's stilla, which I think is stillum in the homily, but again, it's literally Latin, and that is explained by Ælfric in the homily, but it just means a drop, or a drop of liquid in particular. So we have also rakentra, which is a rakentai, which again, modern English, rakan, which again, I've never seen before, but that is the modern equivalent. And it's a chain. So also we have Quirnstan, which is a quirn stone, modern English. Mirestone is definitely the more common term for that. Maybe if you're a miller, you know the word queenstone rather, but if you're not, maybe not. Another word of note is angel, which means angel almost every time it pops up in Ælfric. But one time in this homily, it does not mean angel. And that is when it's talking about Peter going fishing, and it means fish hook. The more common version is anjol, and is actually related probably to the word angles or also the angeln. So the Anglo-Saxons, it's where it would be related to the word the English, right? So it has some interesting uh, weight to it, I think. So whether the Angles are named after the place they come from, Angeln, which kind of looks like a hook on the coast, or if it's because they're fishers, who knows really? That's really ancient history. I believe the Angli are mentioned by Tacitus even. Um, up here somewhere. The Angel is actually right here, which I believe is in modern day Germany. It's actually right at the edge of the Angel, so right here. If you can see my mouse, this is where Denmark starts, actually modern. But so that part of Jutland is in Germany, and this part is in Denmark. But of course, traditionally, Denmark didn't cover any of Jutland. And I say traditionally, I mean like way back traditionally. Traditionally, Denmark would have been all in Sweden, actually, in Scania. And so you could actually see something like when you're getting the hegemony of the Danes, they're over here in Scania, which they only lost, relatively recently. It's not been in anyone's lifetime, of course, or their great grandpa's lifetimes or anything like that. But they're going into Sealand, which is, of course, where their capital is today, where their old capital of Leira would have been as well. And they're pushing out the people over here, essentially, right? Our Jutes, well, okay, either pushing them out or assimilating them, overthrowing their meat benches and assimilating them, right? Many Jutes and many Angles probably just, a lot of their descendants probably just speak Danish, maybe some German or Low German in particular, or High German, right? Right. But some did move, right? Did they move into Frisia? Did they move into Saxon territory? Maybe they went over to England, or what become England, among the Britons and the declining population there after Rome left. And so you have an interesting ideas going on here. Some things that I have seen, I've not studied super well in depth, actually, is I think both these maps are interesting, actually. The one thing I like about the one on the right, actually, is it shows this map here, Finn or Funen, as being English. And I think archaeologically and the little bit of linguistic evidence we have actually kind of supports that. And it makes sense. It's literally right by where the Angles we know would have been. This is the Angle right here. And we know the Danes come from over here. And so they're pretty much neighbors, actually. And I think when you have Saxo Grammaticus, when he talks, he says the Danish nation is founded by two brothers. And what are their names? Dan and Angle. And so you can tell that they have this old history going back. But I'm not saying, okay, how do I say this? I'm not saying the English should go move back to Denmark and claim it as their territory. I'm not saying anything like that. I don't think that's how homelands work or anything like that. But and that's a lame excuse. What is interesting, though, is that you do actually have, I think, pretty much all of the oldest runic inscriptions come from Funen. And they tend to actually show West Germanic, be really early. But kind of on the side of West Germanic sounds, as opposed to Proto-Norse. Now, when you look up any of that stuff, though, the only thing you're really going to find on the internet is all going to label them as the earliest Norse, which probably has some nationalistic purposes. It's like, don't invade me, Germany, because Germans speak a West Germanic dialect, even though this would be more English than other things. But again, who really cares? I mean, what is it? English wasn't a thing back then, right? And, but it would be more English in a sense than it would be Danish. And so, like, if it is West Germanic, it's actually not the ancestor to say, like, modern Danish. Even someone like Jackson Crawford, when they found that the Hirila inscription, I think very early last year, he said it's probably more West Germanic than a North Germanic thing, which again, not like it matters besides the fact just accuracy is fun and nice to know, right? And so I do think showing this Funen as being English in a sense over here makes sense to me. And so, again, with certain things, certain findings, runic findings showing some West Germanic features and not some North Germanic features. Of course, there is this idea of Northwest Germanic as opposed to just completely separate North and West Germanic, but I digress too much. So interesting archaeological stuff going on there. I'm also not a huge expert on runes anyways, but it is some stuff I want to look more into. But again, let us actually just close actually with a contemporary sonnet actually on Michaelmas, and that is from Malcolm Guite. I'm not actually sure. I hope I say his name. He actually has a YouTube channel. Maybe I'll tag him down below and you can go visit it if you are somehow not already familiar. But this is from his book Sounding the Seasons, which is a series of sonnets over the liturgical year. I don't actually have the book. This one, I found this poem because he posted it online. And so I'll try to link that specifically. I'll try to link his YouTube channel as well. And that is, this is a good poem. Let me read it real quick for you. Michaelmas gales assail the waning year, and Michael's scale is true, his blade is bright. He strips dead leaves and leaves the living clear, to flourish in the touch and reach of light. Archangel, bring your balance, help me turn upon this turning world with you and dance. In the great dance, draw near, help me discern, and trace the hidden grace and change and chance. Angel of fire, love's fierce radiance, drive through the deep until the steep waves part. Undo the dragon's sinuous influence, and pierce the clouded darkness in my heart. Unchain the child you find there, break the spell, and overthrow the tyrannies of hell. And I think that is really touching and some good imagery, good use of words, and I appreciate it. I appreciate Malcolm's work, but I think that is the big thing about the symbol of Michael in a sense, and for Michaelmas is that Christ wins in the end. Christ triumphs. The blood of the Lamb does, right? As mentioned in the book of Revelation we looked at earlier. And so it is a positive thing, especially now as harvest essentially. The season again is called harvest, but most of the harvests are over, even here where I am, right? We're getting really to the tail end of potato harvest and raspberry harvest, and the tail end of apple harvest as well here. So most things have already been harvested, and we're getting near, we're past the halfway point equinox of the season, which I know now in modern times begins autumn, but traditionally we would already be halfway through with it. So, and I think it is a good reminder going into the darker seasons of winter. So, anyways, it's been Liam. If you have any questions or notes or want to tell me all the things I got wrong, then go ahead. But you can either comment down below or reach out to me elsewhere. So, anyways, happy Michaelmas.